Welcome to our Space Force versus Upload bonus episode. My name is Jules.
I'm Lex.
Basically, both of these shows were created by or co-created by the same guy, so we thought we'd compare them. The category is going to be plot, world building, characters and writing, funny question mark, and then just talking about the future in kind of general terms. Would you like to start by giving us your thoughts on either one of the plots?
So Space Force had a lot of potential. It's got an excellent cast. I mean, all of the big names in comedy are in this show. Some of them only for seconds. It's kind of crazy. Everything on paper says this show should be a success. The problem with it is that it doesn't go deep enough. Everything is really, really superficial, and we have a lot of side tangents. I'm not even sure what the main thread is. It kind of feels like every episode they're sort of making it up as they go along. It's supposed to be this kind of office-like approach to Space Force, obviously, and they've got to get boots on the moon super fast. Obviously, part of that is because the Chinese beat them, and other countries are developing things faster. But when the Space Forces started, it's like they want boots on the moon by 2022, and then it's a 4-year plan to build the moon habitat, and then they have to do it in 3 days, and it waffles back and forth, and it's like a plot that it doesn't seem to know where it's going.
I can't tell whether it's the creators of the show or the characters that seem to be honestly yearning for like the Cold War and the space race, and the fact that I think all of the music is either it ranges between kind of early 60s and early 70s, and I just honestly wonder whether the show would have been better off being set around the first space race. I know it's very much about Space Force, it's about Donald Trump, it's about what's actually happening in the world, but the sentiment just very much seems kind of stuck in the past. Men of a certain age who kind of reminisce about when men were men might get a lot out of this show. I do wonder whether it should have been set maybe in a different time period. And as you were saying about the episodes, this very much feels predominantly like an episodic TV show to me, whereas Upload, which we'll come on to, feels more serialized. And I think I'm at a place maybe in my life where I'm probably more interested in serialized storytelling, even in comedy. It can, like, episodic works so well in things like The Office, but the writing here just isn't good enough, I think, to do something that's episodic.
A good example of that is the conjugal visit episode, when Erin kind of tags along and she ends up getting left at the prison at the end of the episode. And then the next episode starts, she's just going for a jog on the base, and they completely do not address the fact that he flew off and left his teenage daughter outside of a prison in the middle of nowhere, or how she actually got home again. It's like the world reset. And in terms of it being about things that are happening in the world right now, I think that's a huge problem with it. I mean, obviously, the creators of the show couldn't have anticipated that we would have a global pandemic and riots and basically the shit hitting every single fan in the room. But I think a lot of the humor, and maybe this should really go under writing. I don't really know where to fit this in, but a lot of the humor is kind of misdirected and not actually. This is not a good time for it. I feel like every time, I mean, obviously they don't mention Trump by name, they don't mention Melania by name, they say POTUS and FLOTUS, but we all know who they mean by the way they talk about them. And I felt like it was basically a slap in the face because of how much they trivialized those people. Yeah, he is a buffoon, he's an idiot, he's completely incompetent, but he's also very dangerous. And I felt like they were sort of neutralizing that danger and taking away the threat he poses to the country, to the world, actually. And it was very reminiscent of the way the media dealt with Trump during the first election, and people were like, oh no, he's such an idiot, he doesn't even stand a chance. And then he got elected because people didn't think it could actually happen. And they really, really make light of who he is and what he's done to the country, and particularly right now when he's responsible for the death of hundreds of thousands of Americans, on top of things that borderline, if not actually are war crimes, to kind of just make him the butt of a joke is really insensitive and insulting as an American.
I have actually some strange opinions on the idea of Space Force, in the fact that I've always thought of it as kind of like a boondoggle. Trump probably had a dream one day and was like, oh my god, like nobody's protecting space. It's my call. It's the thing I'll be remembered for in hundreds of years. And so the fact that at the end of episode 1, this kind of Chinese ship snips the solar panels off of their satellite, I thought it kind of gave him a lot of validation. In my initial thoughts on what Space Force might actually be was, 8 to 10 episodes of people kind of sitting on their hands, because today there is actually no threat in space. Yeah, no, it very much could happen in the future, and I guess there is a logic in, having a solution before you have the problem. But I thought it gave a kind of typical Donald Trump weird tweet rant validation.
I know Space Force is kind of a real thing, but every time I hear it, I think of the film Galaxy Quest, and like I just picture this like movie poster in that kind of same vein, the sort of early 90s space journey TV show like Voyager or Andromeda or something like that. And I find it really, I have to remind myself that it's actually a real part of the United States government now. It just sounds so ludicrous.
Yeah. Let's move on to the plot of Upload, which I think is considerably better. Essentially, Nathan dies. Oh, I mean, we haven't really spoiled much going on so far, but this whole thing will be complete spoilers. Nathan dies in episode 1, so it's not really a spoiler. Uploaded to a virtual heaven. It's set in, I think, 2033, so we're ever so slightly into the future. And when he gets there, he basically realises that he's been murdered. And it's him and his angel Nora both falling in love and trying to solve his murder from 2 different planes of existence. I mean, what are your thoughts generally on the plot of Upload?
It's kind of several different things at once. I think in a lot of ways it's a coming of age story for Nathan, even though I think this happens a lot, particularly with millennials and Gen Z. Our coming of age stories happen later in life because we are not able to kind of have our own agency until later in life because of socio-political and economic factors. So he's probably like late 20s, early 30s, something like that. And who he was before he died was kind of a selfish ass. Like we wouldn't like him, but after he died and his interactions with Nora and his interactions with other people in heaven, he kind of grows up a lot and realizes who he really is. And so I think, on the one hand, it's a coming of age story. Obviously, you mentioned Nathan and Nora falling in love, so it's got a little bit of a romance subplot as well. Then it's got this murder mystery conspiracy plot at the same time, and yet all of those different plots kind of weave together very seamlessly. Like, it doesn't feel like the show doesn't feel disconnected. It feels very much like they know what they're doing, and all of these things complement each other. The plot is really interesting. It has a lot of surprises to it, and not the kind of surprises that you sit there and go like, what the fuck was that? But like the surprises of like, oh shit, I didn't see that coming, which is always nice, because a lot of things, I mean, particularly if you read a lot or just consume a lot of stories, things become very predictable. You're able to kind of predict the various arcs and beats that are going to be in something. And so the fact that this show, maybe not every episode, but enough to keep me interested, surprised me in some way or another. So I think that's a really strong point in the plot area.
Yeah, I mean, I was always engaged, whether it was him kind of learning about this new heaven, which kind of feels a bit like The Sims at points, the murder mystery. We never really knew what was happening. We still don't entirely know what was happening, even though the final episode gives us a lot of answers. I was just always engaged, and I think the fact that it was, as I said previously, this story is told in a serialized format really helps the kind of narrative thread to continue and weave all of these stories together. There isn't this kind of stop-start feeling that you get with Space Force. There was comedy, there was drama, there was moments of incredible sadness. it's difficult to believe that one man was in charge of one and the same guy was like co-creator of the other, because time and effort has gone into establishing so much of Upload, whereas, as you said, Space Force largely feels like a very superficial story and very rushed and very just, it's a very poorly constructed plot. And there was never a moment in Upload where I felt that they didn't know what they were doing. I always felt very relaxed and it always felt effortless.
I was actually fairly surprised at the depth in Upload, because it's kind of marketed and packaged, and even like the way it's filmed is very like comedy, but as you said, I mean, there were some definite sucker punch moments where like I kind of teared up a little bit and was just like, wow, this is really deep.
Okay, well, that's both plots. Lex, it's a real tough choice. But who do you think has won round one?
Oh, Upload by a mile. It's not even really a competition, really. I mean, when it comes right down to it.
It's not. It's like putting, Mike Tyson up against, me. I'll start by talking about the world building and Upload. The fact that it not only built one world well, but I actually felt it built two worlds well. You've got New York 2033, I think, ever so slightly into the future. And we were given technology that you could actually believe was ever so slightly into the future. Maybe not the Upload itself or the download that they're currently working on, but you'd get a lot of kind of, like the police drones was one of them, economy minus, things like that just helped build a very believable near future world. And then you've got Lakeview, which was this, I keep using the analogy of The Sims, but that's exactly what it felt like to me. Nathan, when he died, was uploaded into Lakeview. It kind of feels slightly like an older clientele would live there, but it was kind of perfect. All the rules were very easy to understand. It was just both sets of worlds, whether it was the one that Nora inhabited or the one that Nathan inhabited, they just felt very fleshed out, and nothing about that world felt rushed. It just felt like every detail had been very carefully considered.
As you mentioned, the technology in this is very believable. It's also something that definitely would happen. If rich people could figure out a way to be immortal, they will definitely do that. And again, because heaven is, or the digital afterlife is basically the exclusive playground of rich and wealthy people. Poor people don't have access to it. Which is what Nathan was trying to do, is create kind of like a freeware version of the afterlife, which was customizable so that it could be accessible to everyone regardless of financial position. And we also encounter that we're not kind of like hammered over the head with this, but we do kind of encounter protests outside of Nora's workplace saying that heaven is a right for all and not just a certain set of people. And Nathan also comes up against this because Ingrid basically owns him. He has no capital himself, so all of the in-app purchases he can't actually decide, and Ingrid can kind of dress him up however she wants and approve the purchases he's allowed to make. So there's definitely this focal point on economic inequality and the effect that has, also by, because I mean, you said there were two worlds, but there's actually three, because there's the 2 gigs.
Oh, of course, yeah, the 2 gigs,
which is the kind of pay as you go afterlife, and you get it's called the 2 gigs because you get 2 gigabytes of data every month, and when you exceed your data, you freeze for the rest of the month. And they have you can't really buy extra things. They have free trial books which give you like the first 5 pages. There's basically nothing for these people to do. They're just not dead. And again, that kind of speaks to like the huge economic disparity that exists in Western society. And this is what I think the strength of, and again, this is probably more the writing than the world building, but Upload doesn't shove anything in your face. It just presents things and lets you kind of process them for yourself. And I think that's part of the reason why the world feels believable, because we aren't kind of shoved into this box of believing things that require a huge suspension of disbelief. There's the Nightly app, which seems basically like an extension of Tinder. It's essentially for hookups. Yeah, like as you said, the world is very precise, very specific, very well thought out, and very three-dimensional. It's not that far removed from the society we have now, and it's completely believable that in 10, 20 years we could be where these people are.
I think over the last 18 months, a lot of what I've seen on the internet is people saying, oh, I can't believe how PC Star Trek has got. Or I can't believe how PC this new Twilight Zone is. I myself have actually said quite a few times, I can't believe how, this episode, it was really hitting me over the head. I feel concussed. They weren't even trying to hide what they were actually talking about. I think there was an episode of The Twilight Zone where there was a kid that was president. And the fact of the matter is, as you've told us innumerable times correctly on this show, sci-fi has always done that. It's always been talking about the conversation of the day. The only difference is it used to be able to be subtle about it. Now it's far more, it's far more overt, and there isn't any kind of nuance to it. This is nuance. If anybody's interested, this is how you very carefully put a story that's actually happening in the real world, and you kind of dress it in the clothing of sci-fi. And that is one of the best things about Upload, because it was effortless. In every sense, Upload is effortless in what it's trying to do, the messages it's trying to convey. And yeah, I think that's kind of one of the best things it has going for it.
What are your thoughts on the world building in Space Force? I mean, that pretty much says it all right there.
Whereas between us, we've said it was 2, but you've bumped it up to 3 worlds created in Upload. This feels like half a world, and I'm not being, I'm not just being funny, I'm not being glib. You've got the campus of Space Force, and we're only ever in one building, I think. At the very beginning, the world was kind of created by Trump saying, or POTUS, yeah, because they don't mention him by name. Yeah, we're creating a Space Force, and Mark Naird, when he's just been made a 4-star general and they're around the table, he kind of scoffs because it's such a preposterous idea. And then the guy's like, and Mark will run it. And Mark's like what? I mean, that's it, really. They're all in this one room pretty much half the time, sending stuff up to space I was going to say for a problem that doesn't exist, but obviously, as I've said, the show kind of legitimizes POTUS's thoughts that space needs to be protected. There really isn't much more to it. If we're just talking about the world building, that's kind of it. Yeah, like I said, they have Mark running around the campus. We know about Neil Armstrong's, the little food vending thing that his daughter works at. That's really it. Like, he goes to Congress once. It's so vacant. It's so superficial. It's not even about the fact that they're only in one room. It's about the fact that they don't bother. They don't even try. When you're doing a show about space, maybe they think that's the important thing. That's what everybody's here to see. They want to see the rockets. They want to see, people walking on the moon. But it's just such a non-event, this TV show, in many ways.
Not even trying is a good way of summing it up, I think. As you mentioned, we only see a few locations. We never see the school. We never see the town. We are essentially in one building, and in that building we see 2 rooms, Naird's office and the kind of control center type place. I think they're in the cafeteria at one point.
We briefly saw Mallory's office as well, I think in one episode, and he had all these big heads that he was packing up.
Yeah, so basically this show is taking place in 2 rooms, and sometimes a helicopter, which I think is very short-sighted. They had a lot of opportunities to inform us about the world, to get us more involved in the town of Wild Horse, which we never see, ever. Basically, the only thing I can't really add anything else. They didn't even try to world build with this show. They just kind of threw us in there and said, make it up as you go along.
Again, such a tough choice, Lex. I think it seems like we're both pivoting towards Upload, but only just.
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna twist my arm about it, I guess I'll pick Upload.
Okay, let's move on to characters and writing.
Oh my god. Okay, so we've already talked about how the show is fairly superficial, and when it comes to the characters, that does not change at all. All of the characters, I mean, they're not even two dimensional. They're one dimensional. Probably the most interesting character is John Malkovich's, and he is such a stereotypical trope of an effeminate gay intellectual that I want to stab my eyes out with a fork. And in fact, everybody in this show is basically a trope. You have Nerd, who's constantly referencing World War II, and I mean, the first scene where he gets up to go to the bathroom and he makes his bed and, does this about face thing, and the little song he sings when he's in the moon base, the pseudo moon base, and, he doesn't break any rules, and he's, a good military man. Yeah, there's nothing else to his character. The kind of willful, rebellious teenage daughter who's pissed off that they moved from the big city to the middle of nowhere, who basically mopes around and sulks and does attention-seeking behavior. The idiotic receptionist, the long-suffering attendant, chauffeur. I mean, she's a fucking captain, and she's basically flies Naird to and from the prison for conjugal visits. That's like her whole function. And then she leads the moon mission. So what the fuck happened with that? And you mentioned this in world building. It does seem very reminiscent of the Cold War conflicts, and they seem to be very bluntly reinforcing stereotypes against China and Russia, that we just don't have good relationships with them. It's always going to be antagonistic. We can't possibly work together. They're very arrogant and smarmy, and there's absolutely no collaboration, which I also feel is a very superficial take on the relationships between the three countries. And like Naird at one point refers to someone in the Chinese general as a commie bastard, and I mean, that's just like, we are so far beyond that. They're not even communist, so it's just stupid. But that is a different lecture that has nothing to do with television shows. So yeah, like none of the characters have any depth to them. They're not compelling. They're not interesting. I'm not invested in their arcs. Most of them I find kind of annoying. John Malkovich's character is only good because he's an excellent actor, and in every positive thing about that character comes down to his abilities, and God knows why he agreed to do this show. I mean, I don't know why any of them agreed to do this show. Surely they could have all said no.
Again, it's frustrating that they haven't really tried. Some of the kind of things that these characters do actually really bothered me, and I think it comes down to writing. But I have a few kind of questions I'd like to kind of pose to you, Lex. Well, I'll just say them all, and you can dive in on maybe any particular one you'd like to respond to. When they were playing Space Flag, a Space Force soldier would run forward, shoot an Air Force soldier, and not 10 feet away from other Air Force soldiers, they would turn towards the Space Force soldiers and kind of celebrate, and then obviously be shot in the back where all the balloons were. And I just don't know why is that happening? That's such a lazy thing to do. Mallory, hacked the Air Force's suits, and so they couldn't move. And so Ned went out with the scissors and popped all the balloons. The hands were still working, though, I thought. And the guns weren't, hackable. They were just BB guns. I didn't really understand that either. When they realised that Mallory wasn't a spy, and that his song was just simply him singing a love song to one of the men within the lunar base, why at no point did they turn the song off and spare this, wonderful man even more embarrassment? He chose to fly with his daughter to the conjugal visit and then explained to her that it was for a conjugal visit. And then at the end, when the mother escaped to try and save the daughter, and he somehow found the daughter with the helicopter, and somehow the three of them were all within a very small space. He was commuting from the base with a helicopter to the conjugal visits, And so she's got from wherever that was, which must be a real distance away, the three of them have somehow still managed to convene. It's just so lazy, and I just want my comedies to try a little bit harder.
The love song, oh my god. Okay, I don't even care if they wanted to torture the character. For our benefit, they should have turned it off. And like at least three characters said, okay, we can stop this now, we can turn this off. And Nerd was like, no, let it play, let it play. And it was like, why? It was so long, it was so long, and it just never stopped. The saving of the daughter with the escape, and the finding her with the helicopter. One, I felt that robbed Erin of a really important moment, because like through the whole show she's kind of, I mean, she's like late teen, so she's getting to the point where she's almost an adult. She needs to start having her own agency, she needs to start doing things for herself. And she's been kind of moping around like a spoiled child because daddy doesn't have time for her and mommy's in prison. And you know, I mean, like Nerd was in the middle of an international incident and she's like, oh, I only got 40 seconds from my dad. And it was just kind of like, ugh, I didn't like that. And you know, she called her mom in prison, which was just idiotic. What is her mom gonna do? And her mom said, you know, you're just going to have to handle this on your own, which would have been a really great moment for Erin to show some agency, to show some initiative, to kind of step out of that childlike behavior and take the first forays into adulthood. But no, both of her parents dropped everything. You know, people's lives were literally on the line in Nerd's case, and he just ran and took a helicopter to go save his stupid daughter. And then Maggie broke out of prison with the guard she's having an affair with, which is another ethical thing I have a huge issue with. Yeah, I mean, they basically infantilized her again. Like the whole show was kind of, you need to grow up, you need to be your own person. And then at the very end, like literally the last scene of the season is her parents taking care of her again. And yeah, that just really annoyed me. The whole conjugal visit thing, I never, like, it was a several episode arc. You know, the president, he was supposed to go for a conjugal visit and Mallory was supposed to take him shopping. The president got mad at him and canceled his conjugal visit. Then they finally get the conjugal visit and it's all awkward and stuff, and it turns out that it's awkward because she wants to have an open marriage and blah blah blah. And then he kind of broke down while flying the helicopter and was like sobbing, and it just felt disingenuous. Like I think they were trying to go for kind of a really heartfelt moment, like, oh, you know, he's doing this for his wife, but he's not really happy about it, even though like 5 minutes later he hooks up with this coworker. But it reminded me of when in Upload, when Nathan is first awakened in Lakeview and he's talking to Nora, and he kind of like stumbles a little bit and has a little bit of an emotional moment, and then he kind of gets rid of her and he just crawls in bed and starts sobbing. And like that moment was so believable. I felt for Nathan so much and like identified with him, and it was such a natural reaction. Whereas like Steve Carell, everything he does seems very contrived and very artificial, and it's very performative. And I think that's probably one of my biggest problems with the show. Everything is performative, and yes, it's a television show. They're performers. They're performing, you know, not real stuff. But good stories should not feel that way. And you know, you mentioned that you expect your comedy to try harder, and I mean, kind of one of the biggest reasons why I did not find this funny at all is that they could not just let a joke sit, like Malkovich's song. It would have been kind of amusing and kind of funny if it had lasted a couple seconds and he was embarrassed and blah blah blah, but I mean, it had to go on for at least a minute, possibly more than that. And that was kind of that is the epitome of jokes in Space Force. They just hammer you over the head with the same joke that isn't even really funny the first time, and then by the time they get to the end, it's just this mangled carcass of something that doesn't even resemble a joke. And you would expect, with so many very talented comedians in the cast, that somebody would say, you know what, this actually isn't really that funny. But nobody did.
Talking about the characters in Upload.
We've kind of touched on this already, but like the characters in Upload are very three-dimensional. I'm going to focus on Ingrid because she was probably the most surprising, and she had kind of the most dramatic arc through the whole thing, and is a very good example of how Upload got characterization right. So for most of the season, Ingrid comes off as this very superficial, materialistic, kind of self-centered person. I think several times I mentioned I don't even know why she's with Nathan, because their values don't seem to align at all. She seemed to like really enjoy being in control of him and not seeing any problem with that. His funeral was basically all about her. And so very early on, I just developed a dislike for her, and I even suspected her of conspiring with Jamie to kill Nathan. And then in the last few episodes, we got to see a different side of her that kind of fleshed her out a little bit more, and it was surprising, but not in a this doesn't seem very consistent with the character kind of way. It was surprising in like when you find out something new about somebody you've known for a while, and you're just like, oh, I had no idea. And basically you find out that she really does actually love Nathan, and she wants this connection with him, and she kind of tries to have more of a connection with him by bonding with his niece that he has a strong relationship with, and being kind of generous and affectionate with her. She stands up for the niece in front of her family and kicks them out because they're mean to her. She gives the little girl Nathan's sweatshirt that like still smells like him. She like changes her hair to match the little girl's, rather than trying to straighten the little girl's hair. It gave her kind of a surprising depth, and I think all of the characters in Upload have that potentiality to them. We saw that in all of them. Maybe not to the same extent that it happened with Ingrid, but we were constantly learning new things about them.
In the beginning, much like Ingrid, we see her as a bit of an influencer type. Nathan comes across as, good looking, popular, and even as the show progresses, he's frequently told by people, acquaintances, that he looks great. Like the outfit he's wearing really works for him and things like that. And he'll be kind of, oh, thanks. Because he knows obviously how good looking he is. But as he progresses, he just develops so much depth, and he actually has this great character arc. Kind of unfair to compare Ned to Nathan, but Ned, let's just forget that. But there is a character arc to Nathan. He evolves as a human being. He talks about himself previously being, I used to be a bit of a piece of shit, when he finds out what he was going to do to Jamie. I enjoyed seeing the kind of journey that he went on, and he had this kind of moment where it was like he was coming to grips with his own mortality after the fact, after he'd passed away. And as you said earlier, that was that moment where he initially came to Lakeview, and he has this moment of real sadness, and he's crying, and it did feel very genuine. Steve Carell's been doing quite a lot of drama actually recently in films, and maybe he's a bit out of touch with comedy. He's maybe a bit out of practice. But to be completely honest with you, not talking about Nathan now, but talking about Robbie Amell, the kind of range that he has, I think this is only the third thing I've seen him in. He was half of the original Firestorm in the Arrowverse. He was in that thing we watched, Code 8. But the kind of range that he shows here, comedy, moments of real sadness, moments of real introspection, and he's got such great body language and such great facial expressions to give a whole new level to some of the comedy that he does. It was just a real joy to watch, and he was able to make, maybe a lesser actor wouldn't have been able to flesh out Nathan so much, but I think it's a testament to both the writing and to Robbie Amell that the character of Nathan really did seem very three-dimensional. And I can foresee a situation where both he and the actor that plays Nora get, this is their moment. This is their breakout moment. And I can see Robbie Amell being scooped up into a lot more kind of film and TV after Upload. I hope he's not, oh, he's good looking, let's make him the romantic lead in these rom-coms, because he's better than that. Oh, he's, quite a strong guy, let's put him in these action films. The dude's got range, the dude's got nuance. He should be in some really interesting roles. I could actually foresee him, being a big blockbuster franchise leader, in the future. But long story short, there is depth to these characters, and there's been a real, it feels like a passion project for the creator. These people it feels like these people mean something to him. He's really invested, and the people involved in the show have really invested time and effort into weaving a really interesting story. And we've got Nathan, we've got Nora, we've got Ingrid, these really three-dimensional characters, and that allows the show to actually slip in a character like the best friend, who I actually really like. He's very, very one-dimensional. He's quite, one note in most of the things that he says. But, if a show earns that kind of goodwill from you, you can accept that. But with Space Force, they are all the best friend, and so you're just desperately looking for something, hoping that a character is going to emerge in an episode of Space Force that will kind of readjust the balance. And then you get an Edison James dropped in, and you just think, why am I watching this? Why am I watching this show? Yeah. Okay, well, that's probably a good point to, unless you have any comeback. Do you have any comeback to that?
I just want to, while we're talking about characterization, you mentioned kind of the three main characters who are very fleshed out, but the Upload doesn't stop with them. Aside from Jamie, who's not really in it enough for us to kind of get a sense of who he is. I think probably in second season because most of the relationship between them is Jamie avoiding Nathan. Potentially in the second season we'll see more of him. But I was thinking specifically of Fran. The secondary characters are just as three-dimensional as the primary characters, which is a really important thing, and not a lot of writers pay attention to that. So kudos to the writers here for doing that. Also for the casting, because the actors in these roles just nail it perfectly. Like as you said, it feels like everybody is invested in making this show really good. But so you have Fran, you have the army guy who is essentially comedic relief. But for some reason he's very quite attached to Nathan. You have the kid who's actually 19 but is stuck in his 11-year-old body because his parents can't let go of who he used to be. And all of these characters are they're not the focus. They're just kind of flit in and out. They have very kind of minimal dialogue, but they all feel very real. Like the relationship between the army guy and his angel is so antagonistic and so bickery, but you get it. It doesn't feel like it's just a laugh. It feels like it's a real relationship. And as you said, Space Force doesn't even have that with their main characters. So
to the surprise of no one, we'll give that one to Upload as well. The next category is funny. I'm going to talk about, I think I'll start with Space Force. Weirdly, it's a longer list than Upload, but for all the wrong reasons. I just want to read out some jokes to you, Lex, from Space Force that really kind of stuck with me. I only wish my parents could be here to see this, but they were unable to get flights from New Jersey in time. That's one of them. Are we sure that the nips will be exposed? Ned asking whether duty means anything to a chimpanzee, but he's absolutely serious when he asks it. All the POTUS jokes, when we think he meant boot, but he said boob, that kind of thing. I think a lot of the time the comedy comes from shouting or swearing in the show, and I'm someone that absolutely loves swearing. I find it very cathartic, but I'm the first to admit that swearing in a TV show, while it's funny, it's a cheap laugh. It feels very dated, and I don't mean 50 years or 40 years. I only mean maybe the turn of the century. As a race, as a species, our comedy has moved beyond Space Force in many ways, but particularly in the brand of humour.
You make a really interesting point there with the humor seeming dated. More than once while watching this show, I had the distinct impression that Steve Carell was relying on old gags that used to work rather than coming up with new ones. There was one joke that made me giggle in the entire thing. It was when the cleaner. I don't know what she's supposed to be doing. Yes, the one with the bird. She very seriously asks if they've considered the possibility of werewolves as a threat since they'll be in their prime environment, and that got a giggle out of me. Mostly because werewolves make me giggle. I don't know why, but I did not laugh at any other point in the show. For a comedy, that's not great. None of Steve Carell's jokes were actually funny. It actually did remind me of The Office, which I found very obnoxious. And it kind of felt like he was trying to channel the same character of this, incompetent person in power who doesn't realize he's incompetent. But in this case, they also tried to make Naird like a voice of morality and kind of a good guy. Kelly at one point says, you couldn't do the wrong thing, so, I'm not worried about you making the right decision. Yeah, none of it was funny. It wasn't even close to funny.
I personally think that about 80% of the whole show's problems could potentially be solved by actually being in a mockumentary style instead of a multicam comedy. I don't feel that the writing was strong enough or funny enough to sustain a multicam comedy. But when you've got a mockumentary style, and obviously I'm thinking of, Curb Your Enthusiasm with Larry David, I'm thinking of both sets of The Office, I'm thinking of things like Spinal Tap, slightly Arrested Development as well. When a joke is told, or when the focus is on somebody that's not very good at their job, often the joke is about their facial expression or silence. And so you'll get, your shaky cam, and it'll kind of zoom in on somebody's head. And that's happened to, David Brent, Michael Scott, Larry David. And that is where I think this comedy could, I'm not saying it definitely would work, but too many times when there was a moment that could have lingered in silence, somebody swore, or somebody shouted, or there was just some very glib throw. We haven't even talked about the Fuck Tony, that character who was god awful, but he would often he couldn't let there be silence. He would just wedge himself into the situation. And I know Steve Carell probably doesn't want to be typecast, but I could, in a parallel universe, this show might be a mockumentary style comedy, and it would allow for there to be less bad jokes and more kind of telling the story with your facial expression. I just wonder, I just lay in bed at night, wide awake, thinking, oh God, could it have worked with mockumentary style comedy? It probably still wouldn't have. But there was one conversation that took place between Mark and Kelly where he was essentially inviting her on a date. He kept saying the wrong thing and he kept trying to end the conversation. And there were these moments where you'd see Kelly's facial expression, or you'd see him, this moment of silence between them. And it kind of, things like that worked. I think there was a moment in episode 1, I cannot remember the circumstances, but I think it was when he was round the table with 3 people from Congress, and he said something about, cooking a Wendy's burger with a rocket or something. And there was this moment of silence where his incompetence was the joke, and then we're looking at him like, is he serious or not? It was something as opposed to nothing. I'm not saying it was the funniest moment of the whole entire series, but it was a different approach that I feel they could have dived into a bit more, because the fact that it was multicam, it almost made us want to take his character more seriously, when the fact is his character was incredibly inept, incredibly incompetent, and frankly shouldn't have been in the role that he was in anyway. So when you've got a story like The Office, where the exact same is true of Michael Scott, the mockumentary helps undermine the character, whereas multicam almost helps add respect to the character. So yeah, I don't know, that's just one half considered thought I might have about how this show could potentially been saved, but you just never know.
One other thing, because you mentioned a few times that a lot of the jokes relied on profanity as kind of the punchline, and I think it's not 1947. this isn't Captain America saying, watch your language. It's 2020. We have profanity on shows like all the time. Even like PG-13 movies can say fuck once. We don't live in an age where profanity is shocking or abnormal. I mean, I say fuck probably 50 times in every podcast, and I don't even realize I'm doing it. It just happens. So to try to make a joke out of that is just lame. I don't know if the mockumentary would have worked better. I think I was expecting a mockumentary because I think somewhere I saw that it was supposed to be a mockumentary style show, and then I was really surprised that it wasn't. I agree with you though that a lot more could have been made of facial expressions and body language. That that would have given more nuance to the comedy. Also, if we were not meant to sympathize with Nerd and we were just shown his incompetence instead of showing us his incompetence, but also wanting us to root for him, that's kind of a divisive purpose there. But yeah, so Upload was funny in not in kind of like a laugh out loud sort of way, but in a identifiable real world way of like, oh yeah, I've been there, I've done that. I feel for you. There was a lot done with, as we mentioned, facial expressions, with body language. There were pauses. There were a lot of ridiculous things that were said and just kind of left to kind of hang in the air. Whereas Space Force was just, it was not funny at all.
I think Space Force, I mean, as far as I remember, and I've tried to expel it all from my brain, to be honest with you, I think every joke in Space Force was tell me. And some of my favourite jokes in Upload were show me jokes. Seeing Nora in the plane in economy minus, I thought was a really good visual joke. It was very, very simple.
Oh, it was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant. Yeah, give it 10 years and we will be there. I mean, that was hilarious, and it was filled with moments like that.
Yeah, another one was when they were shopping around different kind of virtual afterlives, and Nathan kind of coming up into that crystal ball screaming. That was so brilliant. And again, visual gag. It involves screaming, but it was so, they were having this very gentle kind of conversation, and Nathan suddenly introduced, I think the guy says, he was like a kind of travel agent kind of guy. He was like, let's introduce the man of the moment, and he just pops up into this ball screaming. Was so funny. I definitely liked the kind of Sims humour, and I liked when Nathan kind of was creating a painting in exactly the same style that you do in The Sims. I even liked the moment, and it was not quite as funny as the other ones, but when there was a kind of fault with Lakeview and he briefly had like a Minecraft head. And all of these jokes, they're show me jokes, they're so simple to do, and it eliminates any danger of there being shitty writing. So I just wish, Space Force could have had some more kind of visual gags rather than just relying. They almost built the whole thing around swearing and shouting. When they saw that ship come and snip the wings off, and Ned goes, motherfucker, and runs to the car. And you're like, okay, maybe you can get away with that once. And then Malkovich goes to the telescope. He looks up, sees the same thing taking place, and he goes, motherfucker. And it just was like, I don't really want to hear John Malkovich swear in the first place, but it's just repetition of these very cheap, lowbrow kind of swear-related jokes.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think it was very telling that, like, for every scene you mentioned in Upload, like, just thinking about it legitimately made me laugh. Like, you just mentioned it and I laughed. That kind of epitomizes Upload's humor. Like, even after the fact, without seeing it, just thinking about the scene is still funny.
And as I said previously, when you've got three-dimensional characters, the show has earned goodwill from you, and you can slip in a kind of one-dimensional character because you've earned that. With Upload, we've had all these great visual gags, and that creates goodwill in us for them to slip in something like Ingrid going, tech support, and that time when she's in the Afterlife travel agent shop and she goes, eject. they're not quite as good, but there's goodwill with Upload. We're okay to something that's not quite landing as well. And I think, that's just the difference between the two shows, is that one has created so much goodwill in me, and the other one has it hasn't offended me, but it's barely tried in so many regards that I'm less likely to kind of recommend it.
I literally dreaded having to watch every single episode of Space Force. But for 10 episodes, I mean, thank God they were only half-hour episodes. I think I would have died if it was actually 10 hours of Space Force. And at one point, I did actually consider not watching the whole series and just, giving my opinion on the first couple episodes and pretending I'd watched the whole thing, because I didn't really think my opinion was going to change. And you know what? Turns out I was right.
All right. Funny, which way's it going?
Oh, Upload, without a doubt.
Final topic, just generally maybe to talk about our overall thoughts, but also to talk about the future of the show. Space Force leaves us with a couple of cliffhangers. The crew on the moon with no base. The Ned family have kind of got together. Ned is I don't know if he's like a war criminal or something, but they think he'll be court-martialed if he returns. Long story short, none of that interests me remotely, and I have no interest in seeing any of these characters ever again. I will say the one kind of recurring theme that did interest me was this, in the first episode, it was seeing actually something snip their satellite. And then when the chimp was, taken into this space station, and then these kind of nameless, faceless Chinese researchers that are on the moon with their base, I was kind of interested by the mystery of that. But so little of the focus of the show actually went towards that. We were meant to sit through conjugal visit trip after conjugal visit trip. We were meant to be interested in Aaron Ned. And for the record, if I could go back in time and get involved in the writing process of this show, I would remove the character of Aaron Ned entirely, root and stem. I don't want to see any more of this show.
My feelings are pretty similar. One of the things we forgot to mention that it did kind of piss me off was they made a big deal about Captain Ali being both the first black person and the first woman to be on the moon, and there was all this pressure on her to say something profound and meaningful, and she came up with "It's good to be back on the moon," and it was kind of like, well, that's stupid. I think they could have come up with a better initial line for her, but then she gets there and she ends up saying it's good to be black on the moon, and then god damn it, and she turns into a TikTok meme. And again, probably because of the current situation, it just felt like that was really misplaced or mistimed. Comedies don't have to be funny all the time. Not every line has to be a gag. You can, and I think this is where Upload succeeds. You can be serious in a comedy, and it's okay. In terms of the future of the shows, I'm really invested in Upload, and I couldn't care less about Space Force. Unfortunately, I think that Space Force is going to run for 6 seasons, and Upload will be lucky to get 3.
10 episodes? I think at least 3 were filler as well, which really pisses me off. I think Space Tag, the one with Edison James, and the one with the Lunar Base, they're all kind of just, it's your first season. It's 10 episodes. It's not 22 episodes. You don't need filler episodes. But it just felt cheap. It felt rushed. It felt misjudged. And it's worth noting that it has gone down like a bag of shit around the world. All the reviews are bad. So I'm hoping, if anything, if it does come back, it will definitely come back for at least one more, but it will be retooled and changed, I pray. As for Upload, I think I counted 1 filler, and that was the Grey Market. It just feels new. It feels deep. It feels like it has something interesting to say in a very nuanced manner, which is really refreshing at the moment. The kind of cliffhangers we're left with are, is Ingrid actually dead? Because that's quite a big one. Do people still want him dead? Is there going to be some kind of, people within Lakeview trying to kill him? That could be an interesting dimension for them to go with it. 2 Gig Life, how long is he going to be in that? How's that going to work out for him? And obviously Nora is away with Byron. And I must say that it would be remiss not to mention that moment where Nathan is greyed out and his 2 gigs are down to 0 and he cannot say, nor has just said I love you to him.
Oh, and the tear. I mean, that's such an overused ploy, but oh my god, it had so much emotion to it.
I'm all in on Upload, similarly to you. We've gone through 5 categories. I count 5-0, which is kind of, damning. The word is damning. I would be recommending Upload to everybody. I don't actually have Amazon Prime. I have had it previously, and I have gone through it and checked if there's anything I kind of need from there, and there isn't. And so I actually think that if Upload is released as a physical kind of thing, it's something I might actually purchase. And it's not something I say very often these days, but that's how much I enjoyed it. Space Force has just misjudged everything. It feels very dated. I think Putin said once that those who don't miss the Cold War have no heart, but those who want it back have no brain. And I know that because it's on Call of Duty. When you die, they put these quotes up from world leaders. And it feels like these people kind of want a return to the Cold War. And again, I don't know if it's the writers or the characters. I'm hoping it's just the characters. But the world in every sense, I'm talking about the comedy, I'm talking about the sentiment, I'm talking about, war in general. The world has moved on entirely from that to a new kind of nuanced storytelling. And that is Upload, as far as I'm concerned.
Upload is very sleek, it's very smart, it's funny, it's topical. It definitely has some good gags to it. I think, all around, it's just a very well put together show, and I hope the second season continues in the same vein as the first. I don't know what the behind the scenes dynamics are, but given what Greg Daniels did with Upload, I can see that I can envision a scenario where Steve Carell kind of took over Space Force. All right, so that does it for our Upload versus Space Force showdown. If there are other shows that you would like us to do this with, hit us up on Twitter or social media. We have Patreon. It's patreon.com/geeknerdpod.
Don't watch Space Force. Bye, everyone.